I happened to read a research. When applied electricity, it stimulates plant to grow 30% more faster. They came up with something called e-soil, cellulose-based scaffold infused with electrodes that, when powered up, boosted the growth of seeding by 50%.
Plants use specific wavelengths for their photosynthesis. The most important wavelengths are in the red and in blue. So you can use LED lights. That's the industry standard at this point because they're the most efficient form of lighting. Also, they allow you a lot of more degrees of control in terms of the
wavelength of light, luminosity.
Yes. Some plants have good light distribution within the canopy, in the sense that the leaves at the lower part have better exposure to the light just as the leaves at the upper parts. Most of the times, the canopy is in such a way that the top part of the canopy of the plant shades the bottom part. All the red and blue light that's falling on the plant is used by the top canopy. Under the canopy doesn't get much light. One thing you can do is have a reflective base such that any light that's not directly incident on the plant gets bounced back up into the canopy.
I want to brainstorm a machine. It has to fit inside the apartment. Maybe it should occupy a little kitchen space. Maybe you can imagine 30-40% of the kitchen space.
Yeah.
Let's call it plant growing machine.
A question for you.
Okay.
There was a study then where they looked at, plants. There are some plants that nodulate in legumes.
Right.
They tested two factors. One is light. The other one is nitrogen. What do you think affected the nodulation more?
So welcome back to the second episode with Ajwal D'souza. So in this episode, I want to discuss and moreover brainstorm over an idea. The idea falls under something called controlled environment agriculture, so which you mentioned extensively in the first episode, where you grow the plants, space or desert or anywhere, despite of its external environmental conditions, you provide the optimal environment for plants, right? Things from glasshouse, hydroponics, aquaponics all come under controlled environment agriculture. But I don't want to discuss those things. But I want to discuss something very, which may be at the point fictional or sci-fi, which is not really a need at this point in time, which could be a need in the way like maybe far future. Imagine densely populated urban place. Maybe this is a better example. The Line Project, Saudi Arabia. So the space itself is controlled environment for people, not just for plants. But imagine, where people are living nearby, very close proximity, and also people have their own space. What if there is a space inside your own apartment for plants, maybe nearby kitchen, maybe this space, So I want to brainstorm a machine which operates controlled environment agriculture, which is can be fit inside a kitchen. Maybe we can increase the size of a kitchen, but it has to fit inside the apartment. Maybe it should occupy a little kitchen space. Maybe you can imagine 30-40% of the kitchen space. Let's call it plant growing machine. Just like refrigerator, consider this as a consumer equipment. Consumer appliance. Plant growing machine where the inhabitants grow their own plants, maybe plants of their choice, and have a close proximity to the plants. What do you think about this idea about plant growing machine?
It's a nice idea. It's good for, and it's a nice toy, I would say. It's a nice toy for enthusiasts. Some people claim that systems like this are necessary for solving food security, which I personally don't think is the most optimal use case. It could supplement, fresh produce. Fresh produce is sometimes hard to come by. You'll have something in your grocery store, but it's not fresh. It's been harvested a few days ago, been transported, stored, comes to the store, sitting there for a few days, if not weeks, and then gets to your fridge, and then you probably won't cook it immediately. So there's a massive lag between when it's harvested and consumed. So you can shrink that virtually to zero, right? If you pick your own vegetables and grow. In that case, it's a good system. It has its merits in terms of that you can grow your own food, so you can maybe feel some connection to it. Yeah, it's also more cleaner and safer than something that's field grown, let's say. It could be. Yeah, and just that element of it's probably also a hobby for someone who wants to grow.
It's the luxury want.
Yeah.
At this point.
It definitely has its market.
Right.
Yeah.
So what made me think about this idea is I happened to read a research. I think you have come across this.
Yes.
When applied electricity, it stimulates plant to grow 30% more faster.
Yeah.
So wasn't that like, how was it for you when you happened to read that insight?
From a biological standpoint, very interesting that plants sense and respond to like low voltage electricity. You can make a case of applying this for commercial production, but how exactly is not yet clear. I mean, it's not a problem we can't solve. It definitely can be addressed. Right? You have to develop some sort of systems and fixtures in which it's conductive as they've developed, but scale it up. So I think scaling it up has some sort of you have to work out the kinks to make it work seamlessly. It's a nice thing to test out.
So it states 5 days of low power electricity directed to the roots of young plants boosted the growth more than 50%. Wow.
Yes.
50% more growth.
Yeah.
So they came up with something called e-soil, cellulose-based scaffold infused with electrodes that, when powered up, boosted the growth of seedling by 50%.
Yeah.
The finding could pave the way for a fertilizer-free approach to agriculture. Quite a bold statement.
Yeah, that I don't see that.
Yeah.
It might enhance the efficiency. You might need less nutrients, but nutrient-free, no.
Yeah.
There's no free lunch.
So what can happen in the molecular level or in the tissue level when you apply electricity that can lead to 50% more growth? Like, what is the reason, do you think?
There is no, it hasn't been studied yet. We don't know what's happening in there.
So plant is just a tip of an iceberg, yet to be scratched.
But I'm also, I find it challenging to speculate too. I don't know what's the predominant mechanism. It has something to do with no idea.
I want to brainstorm this idea more, like component by component, technicalities, specification, economics, challenges that has to be addressed, and how to merge these components and form this machine, or how components interact, and how to make this a reality. So let's start with the components. So
okay, maybe I'll just list out the components and then we can...
Yes, right? I will write it down.
Okay, so the first thing is the structure.
The
scaffold, right? The bare bones of the whole thing. Second is nutrient delivery. Yeah, this includes the hydroponic setup, the nutrient solution, and the recirculating mechanisms.
Right.
Then we have lighting, which is another big one.
Fourth one.
We have general environment control. And this includes controlling temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide. Then we would need the software.
And monitoring.
Yeah, the monitoring and control software and all the sensors and cameras associated with it. So
I list down the list: structure of the machine, nutrient delivery, lighting, general environment control, software, and then finally monitoring and control. Let's talk about structure. What do you mean by the structure of machine?
That's sort of the scaffold that holds the whole system.
Okay.
So it's not the most complicated part. It's the most simple.
Okay. Structure, you mean the one holds the plant?
The entire
scaffold.
Entire scaffold. So if you have a system, you have the things that is held in place and sort of the design in which it's executed. For example, you said modular, right? You can make something modular, or you can make something fixed. And in terms of how many levels, and then this is the most simplest part. The steel frames, let's say, that holds the whole system together, right? So once you have that, then you can start attaching all the components on that backbone, on that scaffold. So
how do you define the efficiency in urban plant cultivation? Like, would that be a metric? Like, efficiency per square centimeter or square area, square meter area, or like food produced in that?
You could call it yield or productivity. So you can balance it in terms of how many kilos of food is produced per unit area.
Right.
You can also, because now you're using controlled environments and you can stack up layers. So you're not only using area, but also using the third dimension. So volume is, you can look at volume. So how much kilos,
Volume
how many
is
kilos
needed.
of food per meter cube. You're also expending energy, right? You can see how many kilos of food you can produce per kilowatt hour of energy.
So in that case, which crop is energy intensive, which is less intensive, we can find out.
Yes. And also going back to the structure part, because the goal is to maximize efficiency, right? You have to have some sort of insulation from the external environment, such that there's no dissipation of, let's say, CO2, right? No dissipation of carbon dioxide into the environment, which you can consider a leakage. So it has to be airtight. Probably not. So from a pure efficiency standpoint, having something transparent is not ideal. It's nice to see, but there's loss of light. Light dissipates out. And that's, again, loss of energy. Instead, you can have a closed system, it's not transparent. Instead, it's opaque, while the inner wall is some sort of reflective coating, such that any light that's not absorbed by the plant, that sort of diffuses, is reflected back into the canopy, which the plants can then use. And thereby, you can run the same system at a lower intensity of light compared to something that's open, where light is bleeds out. And thinking of it from a photon level. So each photon has to be used by the plant as much as possible, right? So losing photons is losing efficiency.
Right.
So having something that's closed, opaque, and then having inner walls being reflective.
Right. So here we are trading off transparency with the efficiency. Like, it's really nice, and it has a, like, when it's pretty nice to see when it's transparent, right? Like, you happen, like, when guests come home, they happen to see the plant in the kitchen, like growing of plant. So we are trading that off with the efficiency.
Yeah, but there is a sort of a workaround for this one. That's what we did with the Canada Goose.
Okay.
We used two-way mirror panels. So when it was light inside, you could see from the outside into the system, but you cannot see outside from within, which could be a good, balance between efficiency and visuals. But for pure efficiency, 100% efficiency, closed system is nicer. Yeah.
So we'll come down to nutrient delivery.
Yes.
So it's the system where roots take up water and nutrients, all of it, micronutrients to macronutrients. What is your proposition here? Like, which is better, like aquaponics, hydroponics, or aeroponics? Or maybe what about having soil as a substrate here, and where kitchen waste can be fed into the system as well, where the green waste of the house can be fed into this system, so which can bring about like decomposition there itself, and plants can take up. So it is also clever. Maybe it could be a way for a household to discard their green waste.
That would be tricky because if you visualize your compost bin at home, it's quite messy. So imagine attracting maggots and flies, right? So that wouldn't be an ideal scenario. Directly using green waste is probably not a good idea. You could use soil, but that gets a bit messy. inside a house. The third option is, because it's sort of a hydroponic solution, hydroponic system, you get these growth plugs. It's sort of a plug of about that big.
It's like a cork.
Like a cork in a cork shape. And it can be made of maybe peat or some sort of other stable biological organic material. Or people have also, there are companies that make these from biodegradable polymers, so cellulose, for example. And they're porous, they hold water, and you can germinate your seeds in these plugs. And then basically have a holder in which you place your plugs, and then in the tray there will be nutrient solution flowing, and contact with the plug will sap out the nutrient solution and keep it moist. So that's the way to do it.
So the tray is made of what material?
You can have it made of metal. You can have it made of plastic, although they're not as durable. Just in terms of durability and ease of clean, I think metals are fine. Stainless steel is fine. And in terms of the nutrient delivery itself, aeroponics is okay, but aeroponics has more moving parts than necessary.
Okay, tell me about aeroponics. It's a quite new idea compared to hydroponics, right?
Yeah, so what you do is, in hydroponics, you can have a very crude system where the plant is sitting, the roots are sitting in a reservoir of water or nutrient solution, so they're submerged. That's one way to do it. The other way, there's something called a nutrient film technique, where the trays are shallow, okay? And instead of it being filled with nutrient solution, what you have is a thin layer of nutrient solution flowing on the tray. It's like a millimeter or two.
Thinness. Okay.
Yeah, just
a fine film of nutrients flowing through.
Yeah.
Okay.
The roots are in contact with that film, and that's enough for plants to get their nutrients and water. And with this system, there's less moving parts. Now, what aeroponics is instead of the nutrient solution being delivered as liquid, you convert it into an aerosol. You mist it essentially, and the mist, you atomize the nutrient solution, and that mist sort of is exposed to the roots. The roots will absorb the water and nutrients in that fine mist. This saves a lot of water, but again, it's at the cost of simplicity. You need nozzles that make a mist of these things, and these systems are notorious to get clogged up, and there could be algae building up, which can cause problems. There are also piezoelectric atomizers, which if you see some sort of diffusers at home, right? So the essential oil diffusers, it's a thin piezoelectric strip that vibrates at high frequencies, and that kind of atomizes liquid. So you could use that. But just in terms of the sheer simplicity, I think nutrient film technique is the way to go. You can take the entire tray out without having to deal with the atomizers and all that. The whole system. It's it's just a tray with a inlet and an outlet. That's it.
So for nutrient delivery, substrate, like what do you call that?
Some sort of substrate plug.
Yeah, substrate plug.
Yeah.
It's quite simple.
Yeah, if it's typically these plugs are of biodegradable material, so once you finish growing, you can basically discard it in your compost bin. It can be composted.
If you're going with substrate plug, that means seedlings or seeds inside that plug, right? Okay.
Yeah, so put the seed. You probably have to soak these plugs in water for 12 to 24 hours just for it to get saturated. Imagine it being dry. So it's a dry plug, and then you just soak it in water. It gets completely saturated, and then you take it out and you sow your seed in that plug. And the plug can hold moisture for a few days, and then you keep it in a moist environment. And once the plants germinate, then you can place them in the main system, or you can directly place them in the main, like germinate them in the main system. Doesn't matter.
So any other complication that has to be considered in nutrient delivery system?
A major problem is algae growth. Now, wherever you have rich nutrients, water and light, algae likes to grow.
They will find a way to get there.
Yeah, they'll always find a way to get there, and they'll spread through the entire system. So that can be a major issue in these kind of systems. So
how do algae get in there? Like, is it through seed contamination or something?
Seeds, other plant materials, in the water,
A number of
perhaps.
reasons.
Yeah, the water could have some sort of
Right.
spores or whatever. I don't know. And that can sap out the oxygen in the water, which can harm plants. They also take up the nutrients. And they're a nuisance because they clog up the entire system. It's hard to clean. And yeah, that's...
Makes it more maintenance, like more maintenance heavy.
Yeah. So having some sort of preventative measures such that there's no light that gets into the hydroponic trays would be great. So some sort of cover on top which prevents exposure of light to the nutrient solution while only exposing the
plant
and the plug, the surface of the plug to the light. Right. And once the plant grows, even that surface is covered by the plant.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So algae don't grow in the darkness. They need light.
They're photosynthetic. Right. So having they do need some light. So that's as long as you control that, it should be okay.
Interesting.
But if
any other complications apart from algae in nutrient delivery?
Then you have the nutrients themselves, like the nutrient solution itself.
Right.
So which is basically take water, and then to it you dissolve some, or in it you dissolve some fertilizers. Okay, which could consist, all the whole sweep of nutrients required for the plant, macro and micronutrients. Ideally, there would be a mixture or a fertilizer mix, pre-made for such kind of operation, such that it consists all the necessary ingredients in one powder, let's say, and you basically have some ideal ranges of nutrient concentration for hydroponics, and you have to sort of calibrate it for that requirements, and then you have a dosage. So for every 100 liters, it would be something like 100 grams of that fertilizer. And this has to be tailored for the system. Let's imagine if a company is making the system, then they're also it would be wise to make their own fertilizer mix. Yeah, you have to dissolve that in a tank. There will be a tank in the system at the bottom, perhaps, or even at the top. If it's at the top, you could maybe use use gravity to supply your...
Let's consider that as the seventh part. Nutrient tank.
Yeah. It comes with the nutrient delivery system itself, but if you have the supply using gravity, but you still have to take it back to the tank.
Right.
If it's a recirculating system. So I think at the end you do need some kind of pump. That's one part, the nutrients itself, and then you have to look at a couple of metrics for the nutrient solution. One is the pH, and plants operate best at a specific range of pH, and that's neutral pH tilting towards 5.8.
That is acidic.
Yeah, 5.8 to let's say 7.5. Yeah, 6.5 is a nice target. That's one. And the second thing is what's called the electrical conductivity. How much, it basically signifies how much minerals are there. And it's sort of a proxy metric to see how much salts and minerals are there in the
concentration of
fertilizers.
Right.
So you could, the supplier could test the mixture and see, under the ideal composition, this is the EC value, and this is the ideal EC range. So you can give a targeted electrical conductivity range of maybe 1.1 to 2 millisiemens. Millisiemens per centimeter square. Some sort of monitoring system, which we'll get into later, but something that monitors these two metrics would be helpful.
So this is about nutrients.
Yes.
So have you come across any microbes, use of microbes in the aquaponics or hydroponics? So, there's a lot of research saying that, plants operate better. There is an interaction between plant and microbes, and there's nutrient exchange between them. And there's some sort of a symbiotic relationship most of the time. So have you heard about any, incorporation of microbes into these systems.
We understand that microbes play an important role in plant growth and development. Even humans, right? So your mood and disease progression, whatnot, diabetes, a lot of things in mental health is related to the gut microbiome. Same thing is applicable for plants as well. Plants rely on microbes for a lot of the processes, and we still don't understand the complexity of this interaction. But the technology that we have at this point allows us to look at the whole microbiome, so the whole collection of the microbes that are associated with the plant, maybe in the roots or even in the shoots. So if you allow me full on speculation here, I can foresee in the future where you have a consortium of microbes, right? Something like a probiotic, like for plants. So you can have a probiotic solution or something like that.
Yeah, I think that would be a great research.
Yes.
Like to get into, right?
Yeah.
Right now. It's like inventing a new kind of fertilizer for plants.
There are some crude versions of this, like biostimulants and such. There are single strain or single species microbe additions to the nutrient solution, which do seem to improve the growth and also improve the resistance to some diseases. In terms of, the consortium, the whole collection of the microbes, that would be sort of the next natural progression in terms of the research and application. So you could, do something like a probiotic for plants. And fun fact, by the way, a question for you.
Yeah. Okay.
There was a study done where they looked at, plants. There are some plants that nodulate, right? There are nodules in leguminous plants.
Right.
They tested two factors. One is light. The other one is nitrogen in the root zone. What do you think affected the nodulation more among these two factors?
Okay, light and nitrogen.
Yeah.
Let me think. I mean, I would say light now.
Why though?
Am I right?
You are right,
Okay.
but completely being intuitive because it's a root nodulation, root
nitrogen
zone. Maybe nitrogen is the more more impactful factor, but apparently light, which has nothing to do directly with roots, right?
Is it to do something with I don't know, something called leg hemoglobin?
Yeah, so that is the compound in, or the main compound in the nodules, right? I don't know the exact mechanism, or at least if they had a mechanism, I cannot recall it. But when they tested which of these two affect the nodulation, they found light was more
had more impact on the
more impactful on the nodulation than nitrogen itself. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't know if it was a brief report in Nature Plants. I don't know if they had the mechanism, or even if they did, I can't recall.
So the ideal solution would be this plugs, right? The substrate plugs.
Yeah.
For this, which for simplicity and low wastage of water or something like that.
Yeah, it's easy to use.
Easy to use. So next comes lighting. So when it comes to lighting, LEDs are used in vertical farming.
Yeah.
So do you suggest the same structure here?
Yeah, because the system will be indoors. The indoor ambient light wouldn't be enough, and it could be erratic, right? The plants are now relying on if you're at home or not in the kitchen. So that wouldn't be a good idea. It's nice if they have their own light. So you can use LED lights. That's the industry standard at this point because they're the most efficient form of lighting. Also, LEDs allow you to change they allow you a lot of more degrees of control in terms of the
wavelength of light, luminosity.
Yes, and the duration. I mean, you could control the duration and maybe luminosity with other lights, but you can control luminosity better with LEDs. And then third is that you can control the spectrum or the wavelength, which can be a huge unlock.
Right.
Now, in terms of the wavelength, plants use specific wavelengths for their photosynthesis. And the most important wavelengths are in the red and in blue. So for red, I think it's
450? No.
460-ish. And then 430, 460. And then for
Blue.
That's for blue, yes.
Yeah.
And then for red, it's at 660.
750-ish.
750 is far red.
Far red, right.
Yeah,
right.
but 660 is sort of the peak. And plants use primarily these two wave bands.
Okay.
And peaks.
Do each plant has their own personal, different type of plants? Suppose if you're talking about legumes, do they have a separate wavelength efficiency? Or if you're talking about other plant, do they have separate wavelength efficiency, or is it a general term, like a general spectrum?
So this comes down to the chlorophyll and the photo chemistry systems. So the reaction centers and the chlorophyll molecules, etc. So it's common across the board. So it is at a biochemical level. Okay, so that's common across the board. But where it makes a difference is at a canopy scale. Okay, some plants have good light distribution within the canopy, in the sense that the leaves at the lower part can have better exposure to the light, just as the leaves at the upper parts. Okay, sometimes, or most of the times, the canopy is in such a way that the top part of the canopy of the plant shades the bottom part.
Right.
So any light, if you're using purely red and blue light, all the red and blue light that's falling on the plant is used by the top canopy, whereas the under of the canopy doesn't get much light, and it's just not as active photosynthetically. One thing you can do is have reflective bottom, reflective base, such that any light that's not directly incident on the plant gets bounced back up into the canopy. So that's a passive way of improving the light use efficiency.
So you mean to suggest a reflective trace?
Yes. Right. Yeah, reflective walls, reflective trace. And then there's a more active way where you can use specific wavelengths that can penetrate through the canopy better. Okay. One is green. Green is mostly reflected by the plant, or it can also travel through the canopy better. So while plants are inefficient at using green, they can still use green. So they can make use of that green in the understory of the plant. But again, green LEDs LEDs themselves are not as efficient. Okay, in terms of converting energy to the photons. The other option, probably the more efficient option, is far red. Now, far red can travel better through the canopy. Okay, so that can also improve while the upper canopy uses red and blue, the under canopy gets more of the far red, which it can also use for photosynthesis. But the danger with far red is that it can change the architecture of the plant and how it behaves. And this is tied with the biological mechanism by which plants perceive shade. Okay. Now imagine you're a plant in the forest, and you're a tiny plant growing on the ground, and there are trees that basically cover you up, right? So what happens is the trees will get all the blue and red light, and not much of it penetrates down into the understory, onto the ground, but far red does. So plants look at the ratio between the red light that's receiving and far red light that's receiving to see if it's shade or not. If the difference increases, if there's a lot of far red, very little red, that means it's in shade. So that's how the plants perceive shade. Now, because it's under shade, now the plants need more light, right? So it'll change its architecture to get more light under far red. So it can grow more lanky and grow longer in search of light. It's something called a shade avoidance response. So plants grow longer to get
Such a sophisticated creature.
Yeah. So by adding far red, you might be messing up with these mechanisms. So it's tricky. But let's say for a household system, I think
for simplicity reasons, we can use
red and blue
Mm-hmm.
with passive reflection should be plenty.
Let's see what other popular vertical farming companies use. When I've seen these companies, I had seen them grow under like violet light. So is there any reason particular this violet color?
So violet is the mixture between red and blue.
Red and blue.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So it can be something like 10%.
So what could be the difference between growing plant under normal light, like a natural spectrum, and a growing plant in a red and blue with a mixture of red and blue spectrum? So what the difference one can expect? Growth rate. Yeah.
The growth rate, I think, if you compare with white light, red and blue can be more efficient because most of the light that it receives is photochemically active for photosynthesis, right? So wavelengths such as yellow, green, orange typically wouldn't be as efficient, and they kind of get lost. Instead, if you're targeting the wavelengths, then the other less efficient wavelengths can be eliminated, and then thereby you can also improve the efficiency of the LEDs and also the efficiency of the growth rate of the plants.
So do you know any particular percentage number in mind, like the difference between the plant grown in natural light and plant grown in this efficient spectrum of light?
Well, it's hard to tell because it's a balance between the energy, the energetics, right? So how much biomass is produced, but also changing the spectrum changes, again, the architecture of the plant. It changes the flavor profile of the plant. So you have to look at it from different angles, test it out for different crop species, look at different parameters of interest, and then sort of settle at the most optimum. But for crude control, like a very crude light spectrum, some balance of light, blue and red is the go-to in the industry. I think like 5 to 10% of blue and rest red is sort of a safe bet.
Standard.
Yeah, standard safe bet. But you can tweak it as you like. So if you have more blue, it can make plants more dwarf.
Right.
But also dwarf plants can be more inefficient because the architecture is preventing the understory of the plant. Yeah, it's a fine balance you have to achieve. But let's say for our system here, a mixture of red and blue.
That reminds me of a research finding where I happened to read exposing mangoes to blue light makes them more red, more sweet, and more tasty.
Yeah.
Quite interesting, how light profile, can change the taste or even, flavor profile of food.
So that's because when there's, in the natural environment, when there's a lot of blue, that means there's typically a lot of light. So light during the peak afternoon has more blue than reds, right? And then peak afternoon also means a lot of UV, right? So there's a lot of light, a lot of UV. Perhaps the plant or the mango is perceiving, okay, there's a lot of sun that could be damaging. So it releases some sort of compounds to counteract that, flavonoids, as I mentioned, anthocyanins, which give a red color. Right. And then there's some sort of sugar breakdown mechanism that's maybe making it sweeter. Yeah.
It's quite interesting, simple things, plants have a lot of, everything as it looks like plant has all the genetic switches for every condition.
Yes.
Right? It's quite surprising. They react to every change in fluctuations or everything. Nice.
Yeah.
So that's about lighting. So LEDs are recommended from blue to red spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything with the lighting. I mean, that's the most energy consumptive part of the system, right? The lighting.
Yes.
So any suggestion on how to make it more energy efficient? Do you have to, run this lighting 24/7? I mean, 24/7 is the better, the more produce, right? Or something?
Yeah, but not for all plants. Some plants do like 24 hours. They can handle 24 hours lighting. Some other plants, not so much.
Okay, they have a sleep cycle as well.
Yeah. And, messing with the photoperiod. Photoperiod being how many hours per day are you giving the light or keeping the lights on, can affect some of the plant development process. So some of them, some of the plants, they flower based on the photoperiod. There are some plants, for example, take coriander or cilantro, and based on the photoperiod, I think long photoperiod stimulates flowering, but as soon as the cilantro plants start to flower, then the flavor profile of the leaves changes, and it gets more bitter, and it's not pleasant. So you don't want cilantro plants to flower. So in that case, you'd have to have a shorter photoperiod with darkness. I think 16 hours of light is fine.
I think for this machine we need to have a catalog, in a sense, for which plant how many duration of light is max. As I said, coriander or something, 16 hours a day or something. If it's tomato, it doesn't matter, 24/7 works. For this particular plant, having light exposure profile is necessary, the catalog for this machine in the software.
But also it's the point of diminishing returns, right? So 16 hours is okay, it's fine. But taking it from 16 to 24, what is the gain that you'll get? If it's marginal, then might as well stick to 16 because you're saving on power. So some sort of tweaking and finding the balance would be nice. But again, if you have different photoperiods, then you're again adding some complications. If you're well versed with the photoperiods and system, how plants behave, then perhaps you can play with it. Having an option to play with it would be nice.
No, I have no idea. First time I'm asking this question in my mind as well. Do plants take rest? If it's 24/7, that means they have to be actively photosynthesizing. There is no rest.
There's it gets into the whole system of circadian biology and circadian patterns and all that. Some plants can handle it. Some plants outright cannot.
So what do you guys do inside your lab?
We use a standard of 16/8.
16 hours.
16 hours of light and 8 hours of night or dark. Sometimes, depending on the experiment, we will test 24 hours lighting. Yeah, you can play with the photoperiod. Sometimes if it's a flowering plant, then the photoperiod can be a signal to induce flowering. So you can use that as a signal. But also going back to the circadian biology part, right? So let's say the plants are growing for 8 hours night for a month, and then suddenly you change the photoperiod, increase the photoperiod or decrease the photoperiod. The plants kind of get confused because it disrupts their circadian rhythm.
Order.
Yeah, and then that can create some stress in plants. So it's called a photoperiod stress, and it's associated with the circadian systems. So yeah, photoperiod can be an important factor. Right. But thinking for the system, you probably have multiple crops growing, right, in the same system and the same level, let's say, and then you also have to be considerate of the energy requirements. And LEDs are probably the biggest consumption factor in a system like this. So balancing the energy use and the biological demand somewhere. Taking the photoperiod from 16 to 24 gives you only 5% increase in yield. I think it's a better idea to keep it at 16 because 16 to 24 will be a lot more energy intensive in the long run. Right. So if you do the arithmetic, it adds up a lot for the whole production cycle. So yeah.
So 16 hours of lighting.
Yes.
Okay.
And another way to be more efficient is, let's say you have 3 levels, and each level is for different growth stage. You have the initial germination at the bottom.
Juvenile or...
initial growth in the second, and then the remaining part at the top. So by doing this, germinating seeds don't need much light. So the bottom level can be very low light, dim light. The middle level, because they're just growing and they're like that big, it can use less light, slightly more than the germination, but not as bright. And then when they're transferred up to the top tier, where they're aggressively growing, and then the canopy gets bigger, you need more light. So that can be brighter. So that way you're efficiently using the light. And the next thing you can do is to use the space. So if you have 3 rows of plants growing, right, you have the canopies of those plants, but there's a little bit of space between those trays. Right. And there's light that's falling on that space. So you can grow some sort of microgreens or sprouts in that area where it's utilizing that space. And because it's sprouts, it's only, you harvest it when they're that big. And that also can be an efficient use of space.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's about the lighting. So general environmental control. What do you mean by that? Like how it is the interaction, contamination from the outside environment?
So the environment control comes down to basically maintaining the environment, right? So you have to have temperature control. You have to mean if you have a set point of 22 degrees or 24 degrees, there has to be a system that heats and cools the system to maintain it at 24 degrees compared to the ambient temperature, right? So if it's a system, something that's used in a place like this where it's blistering hot and 30 degrees, it has to be cool to maintain it, to be maintained at 24. And if it's a very cold region, then some sort of heat up. Yeah. So something that adjusts the temperature based on the feedback. The next thing is carbon dioxide. So it would be nice to have higher concentration of CO2 than ambient, which increases the photosynthesis and biomass production, right? So some sort of CO2 cylinder that's attached and it dispenses. You have to have a system that dispenses CO2 such that you maintain a elevated level, let's say 600 or 800 ppm. Again, you need a feedback control.
Right. So in that case, we need to add a carbon dioxide cylinder, CO2 cylinder alongside this nutrient tank.
Yes. The other thing is humidity. So how humid the air is, because that can drive transpiration and water uptake. So some sort of system that monitors and maintains these 3 environment conditions is necessary.
So these are the 3 main environmental control concern.
Yeah, the aerial environment.
Temperature, CO2 and humidity. So what about the temperature? Like which is the ideal temperature for plant growth? Like is it different for different plants, or is there a general number or something?
So it can be different for different plants. Some plants are adapted well to high temperatures, some are not. But it also comes down to the activity of the enzymes that carry out the photosynthesis, right? So rubisco being the main one. So I think it has a ideal operational range in terms of temperature, and anything below or above that range will decrease the activity of that enzyme, and also other enzymes that are part of this whole process. Yeah, finding an optimal temperature would be nice, and a rough ballpark, 24 to 26 degrees is a fine temperature for growing plants.
So this is one more energy consumptive feature of the system.
But depending on what the environment is, because if it's a climate controlled house, you could use those environment conditions. But again, for that you have to have the system open. Right. If the system is open and the kitchen is maintained at a nice ideal temperature, 24, 25 degrees, and the humidity is fine, then it's okay. But if it's a dry place, it's not enough humidity and such, you cannot really, it might not be ideal, and also you cannot really improve or increase the CO2 concentration because now it's open.
So CO2. Okay, so we need external supplementation
Yeah, but
CO2 in cylinders.
Yes, but temperature control wouldn't be too hard because I think refrigerators are more energy intensive because you have to cool them. You have to maintain this cool temperature. Whereas for a system like this, it's nothing extreme, right? You're not bringing it down to 0 or something like that.
Just have to maintain homeostasis.
Ambient temperature. So it shouldn't be that hard.
Okay, so when it comes to humidity, so how do you maintain a humidity in the system? So you moisturize it with, is it? So there has to be some kind of a humidifier.
Humidifier
or dehumidifier.
It depends on, again, the ambient. If the ambient tends to be dry, then you need humidification, because then once you humidify it and then it equilibrates to the dry conditions. So you have to be constantly humidifying it. But if it's too humid ambient condition, then you have to kind of capture. But plants themselves
makes the system humid, is it?
Yeah, they transpire water, so it's.
If the system is closed, the water droplets will condense in the corner and get back into the. The water will get back into the cycle, into the tank.
Yeah, you can do that. It's done in large-scale vertical farms where there are like these condensers, which pull out water from the air, and then it's put back into the system.
Right. So my curious question is, how humidity influences plant growth? Like what exactly happens?
I say humidity, but to be more specific and technical, it's not the humidity per se that's important, but it's what is called the vapor pressure deficit.
Interesting.
Okay, let me explain. So what vapor pressure deficit means is that it's the difference between the moisture content in the air and the moisture content in the plant leaf. So that differential is what drives the water uptake. Okay, it's something like the voltage part.
Right. Low and high.
Yeah. That difference is called the vapor pressure deficit. We assume that the leaf is saturated. So inside the cavity, the stomatal cavity, it's 100% moisture. And then we measure the humidity in the air, right? If it's too dry, if the humidity is too low in the air, that means there's a huge vapor pressure difference or deficit. Then that can drive excessive moisture loss from the leaf to the air. And when there's excessive moisture loss, what happens is plants go, oh, I'm losing a lot of water, I'm dehydrating, let me close my stomata. When you close the stomata, there's no gas exchange, so that diminishes photosynthesis.
Right.
On the other end, if the air also is extremely humid, right, it reduces that drive, that difference.
Right.
So there's less water uptake, which can also be problematic.
Right.
So
that is indirectly, that directly defines how much the rate of water consumption from the root as well, right? So
yes.
Difference.
The evapotranspiration, that process, the uptake of water is for a large part driven by this VPD or vapor pressure deficit. And that's a more accurate description of how plants respond to this than the relative humidity itself. Yeah.
So for the general environmental control, we have temperature, CO2, and humidity.
Yeah.
Any other things to add here? That could be a concern when it comes to placing that in the kitchen or no.
Yeah, so it should be fine. If it's sealed, it should be fine. Yeah.
I'll come to monitoring and control, which is nothing but play of sensors.
Yes.
So do we need sensors? Like experimental, we can understand the whole point of doing an experiment like yours is to find the truth, like, what is affected by what, cause and effect relationship. Do we need monitors for consumer appliance? Like if thinking this as a consumer appliance, would the consumer would be interested in monitoring the plants, getting the feedback from the sensors? So what is the role of monitors and sensors in this kind of situation?
Yeah. So sensors would be necessary. Some of them will be necessary for basic operation. So if I previously mentioned about the nutrient solution, the pH and EC is
for nutrients.
Very important metric. So having some sort of pH and EC probe that's integrated with the system, and it sort of displays what the pH is, what the EC is, so the nutrient solution that you made is sort of safe for the plants and effective. So that's one sensor. You could use sensors for two things. One is the essential monitoring and control. So as I mentioned, the pH EC is one. Monitoring the CO2 for maintaining the concentration, monitoring the temperature, monitoring the humidity, and this plays into the previous aspect of environment control. And then you have you can add another suite of sensors that's more exploratory, not necessary to run the system.
No, interesting. What are those?
You could have cameras. So you could see a live feed of plants growing.
Right.
You could have...
Cameras would be interesting because you can also live stream it to your TV. So you can watch your plants grow in the TV, or, the whole time lapse of plant growth.
Yeah, you can make time lapses.
Right.
So you could do that. You could use some infrared cameras to see the greenness of your plants.
Right.
So how green they are. And if they're not as much green, then it might indicate that something's wrong, right? So they're yellowing, and that means maybe nutrient deficiency or something like that. So it could be integrated into the system and have some sort of machine learning algorithm that says, your plants are in trouble. So it can be used to alert the users that something isn't going right.
So the electrical, EC, pH, CO2, temperature, humidity, these are the basic 5 fundamental sensors that is needed to operate the system itself.
Yeah.
So what happens if, let's say, the inhabitant, the human, has added more, while making the nutrient solution, accidentally, human makes error. So there's more pH. The pH is more basic or something. The electric conductivity is more, more than what is prescribed. So you need a logic gate as well, right? So the sensors would feed, and what is the solution for this? For human-made errors here. If there's more EC and more pH because of human-made errors, so how would the system respond to this?
One way to counteract is make it foolproof as much as possible. So maybe the tank is of a specific volume. You cannot overfill it, let's say. And then you make pouches, precisely measured pouches for each tank. So you fill it up to the max. And once you fill it up to the max, you can how much, precisely know how much volume that is. And then for that precise volume, you get a pre-measured pack of nutrient solution. And then you basically, dump that in the tank. That's one way of avoiding it. And then just for safety, or just to make it extra foolproof, the monitoring systems can be attached to systems that adjust these metrics. So there are systems that you have to fill them with the necessary adjusting ingredients. So for example, acid, base, and some nutrient solution stock, which is more concentrated than what you added. So if the pH goes more acidic, then the system dispenses at a controlled dose some base, and then keeps monitoring until it reaches the ideal
to neutralize
it. And same thing, if it gets too basic, then dose of acid. And if the salt level or the EC goes down, then you can dose it with the concentrated solution to bring it up. But if the EC goes high, then you basically have to dilute it. But so if the EC goes up, you have to dilute it, and the EC goes up when you lose some water. So there are chances that you will lose some water from evaporation, and then as the water gets lost, the water content in the tank comes down, and then that means that gets more and more concentrated. But at the same time, plants absorb these nutrients. So it depends on if the loss of water from evaporation and transpiration is faster than the rate at which plants uptake the nutrients. So it progressively gets more concentrated, right? So you can put in mechanisms that are constantly monitoring and adjusting these things, and you can have something that alerts the user to refill the tank or bring it up to max. Right. So
that's about monitoring and control. So did you miss anything else? So this is more than enough to be integrated into the system.
I think this covers pretty much
What about the software?
So all of the things that I mentioned, control, monitoring,
sensors
will be all integrated into sort of a brain of the system that takes all these inputs, has models and algorithms in place that churns out this data and sees what's happening, controls, maintains the environment control, and maybe alerts the user as to what needs to be done. So that's part of the software that holds the entire thing together. So that's also necessary. So there should be a computer, sort of an iPad or some sort of a computer that runs the whole system, on which the software will be a part of.
So coming back to the components, so nutrient delivery, which we stuck to substrate plug with a thin film of water and nutrient delivery system, and then lighting, which is red to blue spectrum. 16 hours of exposure. General environmental control. We need 3 things: temperature control, CO2 control, and humidity. Software to combine all of it. With logic, monitoring and control and sensors. Essentially, EC and pH and other 3 things. So how do we integrate these components? So it would be like a hydroponic system, right?
Yes.
Like rectangular in shape. Like suppose Indian apartments or any apartments are. So what level, like how many layers can we expect? Like how many layers is quite ideal? So how do you think about this layering or this placement?
Let's say it'll be something the size of a refrigerator. Right, so we are familiar with the size. It fits within, you can move it through doors. You can move it into an apartment just like a refrigerator. So conforming to that dimensions makes it easier. And then in terms of the infrastructure, you need some sort of power supply, and then some sort of water inlet outlet, as we have for washing machines, right? So that sort of provision in the kitchen would be nice.
These layers, like, can you think of 3 layers, like racks? In the system,
depending on how tall it is. If it's exactly the height of a standard refrigerator, which is close to 6 feet, then you can have, considering some of it will be the tank and some of it will be the guts of the system, all the sensors and power supply and all that. Maybe it could be at the back. You could place it at the back wall or on the top or on the bottom, but let's take some space for the systems, some space for the tank, and remaining, I think you can go 3 to 4 layers.
Okay, 3 to 4 layers. Interesting. So, and these layers can be height adjusted. Like in the bottom layer, suppose you say you're growing a very very short plant, like short crop, like lettuce or something. the top you want slightly bigger, like taller crop, which could be tomato or chili. You can adjust the height. Is it? Would that make things complicated? Having dynamic height to the constant height.
You could figure out a way to do it. Yeah, I mean, it won't be the most complicated thing to do, but I think some sort of ingenious engineering
Right.
that you can easily change the height. One thing you could take the whole thing out and then have different slots, let's say, like you have in a fridge. That could be done. Then you have to figure out how to attach the pipes for the hydroponic things, right? So if you have at different levels, then you might have to have different outlets at each level, which could be a tricky thing to manage. And then you also have the electrical connections that you have to figure out. But fixed height is simpler, I would say.
In terms of inches or centimeters, what would be the ideal height for each layer?
Something like 30 to 45 centimeters. But then
Maybe
again,
1.5 feet.
Yeah, you have to play with a couple of things. You have 1.5 feet, let's say, or 45 centimeters. Then you have to basically choose plants and varieties that sort of conform to the space and have a shorter footprint, shorter architecture. So you have to balance both.
Right. So what plants can be grown under 1.5 feet? Do you have any examples in top of your head?
A lot of herbs, lettuce, kale, coriander, basil, arugula, etc. So all these leafy greens. You can also grow tomatoes, dwarf tomatoes specifically, dwarf chili plants. You can grow radishes. You can grow
radishes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Specific kinds of radishes you could grow.
This is an interesting question. So where would the radish grow? Like, radish is a tuber, right? So they would... okay. So they would be in the tray, is it?
The cherry or the red radishes that I'm thinking of, they're like that big and they're roundish. They're not the white radishes that we are used to.
Right.
But these radishes, they can grow. So when we grew them, they can grow within the plug itself. What it does is it grows inside the plug. It expands. It can grow on top of the plug, where the radish itself is on top of the plug, whereas the roots go through the plug and are in the tray. Or sometimes it can also grow inside in the tray. Sorry, if it's too constricting, then it'll grow into weird shapes. But if there's GU in the plugs, then
it can come up with heart-shaped plug and
you could do
a heart radish.
We had some weird shaped radishes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Weird ideas.
So that way you're using space.
So which plants are very voluminous, like, which need a huge volume, like maybe height?
In terms of height, I think, you have chili plants and tomato plants that needs a lot of, that grow tall. But because you're specifically choosing dwarf varieties, you can avoid that. Of course, grains can take more than a feet. But you ideally wouldn't be using
grains. Yeah.
So any
grains, we can get it from the store, and coriander, lettuce, whatever
fresh
meat supplement, not even complete vegetables, but the which can supplement the main cuisine, main food, like coriander for meat, or that can be grown in this system. Yeah.
Sort of garnishes
in salads. Yeah. Nice. So wow, nice. I think then it's doable.
Okay.
Yeah. So at what cost is the question? So if you think about 3 to 4 racks of and tank, and so what would be the cost? This is the width of it. The height would be,
Yeah. So I probably will stay away from putting a number on this because it's hard, depending on what
minimum cost.
Minimum cost
to build the prototype, at least.
If
considering sensors in there, forget the software. Software is okay, fine. nutrient delivery mechanism for 4 layers, LED lighting, and temperature control, CO2 tank, humidifier, dehumidifier, monitoring and control.
I think I would say a safe figure would be $15,000.
That would
10
be
to 15, at least initially
Indian 10
experimentally.
lakhs in Indian rupees. Oh, interesting.
But I think it'll probably be cheaper if
You
done here.
do it mass scale.
Yeah, but even here,
yeah,
if you do it in India, if it's fabricated, it depends on what kind of sensors you have.
Right. So
the grade of materials you
minimum
have.
cost you say is $7,000. How much?
10 to 15, I would say.
Okay, $10,000 to $15,000.
Yeah.
Nice. Very expensive.
Yeah, it'll start out to be expensive.
Very
but
expensive gadget to grow your coriander.
yeah. Hey, I mean, if someone is interested, it'll probably be this demographic. The rich people living in urban areas who need some like a hobby.
Right.
Yeah.
And find pleasure in growing their own garnishes.
Yeah. It's by no means, at least now, at this point in time,
it makes sense to...
Yeah, me being a college student, probably I won't be able to afford it, and doesn't make sense to me.
So what is the most significant technical hurdle here, like in creating home growing plant machine? Like, it's the most difficult component to deal with.
I think integrating all of these things and making it work in as one seamless machine is
the most difficult.
Yeah. When I say integrating, not only these systems but also the plants itself. You have all these systems that need to work in harmony, like in one as in one system. But then also there are plants that part of this system, and then you have to work with the plants, so that the integrating the whole thing is probably challenging. Yeah,
there's non-living factor and there's living factor, and combining to get a consistent yield is also
because changing one thing can change a whole host of other things, right? So,
but this could be disease-free, right? Pesticide-free, disease-free.
Yeah, for the most part. But there could be chances of some sort of disease attack from the seeds.
Interesting.
In commercial vertical farms, there's strict protocols on biocontrol. So people who are operating in the space, have to change their outfit, wear shoes and gloves and mask and hair mask, and so full like a complete suit, and they have to sanitize themselves and all that. The problem is not with the insects. Well,
the contaminants we carry ourselves.
Yeah, the microbes were probably because they spread easily in the solution.
Right. This would be the most water efficient farming, right? So if the places which is facing water scarcity, maybe in the desert, so if this technology can be made to scale and made cost efficient, it would be a good thing to preserve water, because fresh water is...
It can be much efficient.
How user friendly should this machine interface be? Like, how do you envision, like, if this system happens, like what is the bare minimum the user have to do? Like, and how does the interface would look like, interaction with the machine and with the plant look like?
I mean, at some level, there should be a basic system-specific demonstration or training. That would be nice.
Like how to make this machine accessible for one without any gardening experience.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, because you can make the system itself very intuitive to use. You can have the computer or the iPad that's attached to the system guide you through the processes. The user interface can be made much more user-friendly, but you do have to rely to some degree on the people knowing what they do. So the germination part, the harvest part, ultimately it's not done by the machine, right? So the humans using this have to be a bit well versed in how to manage a plant, how to sow a seed, how deep to sow it, when is the right time to harvest it, and how do you harvest it. Some sort of basic gardening experience will help, which I think most people have. And someone who is enthusiastic in the system, I would be it would be safe to say that they do have some background in this farming, right? So given that they do like to grow plants, is the reason why they want to have the system, is what I'm assuming will be the case.
Do you envision this machine in the future?
Oh yeah, no, it's already a reality. There are systems you can buy.
Like as a commercial consumer toy.
Yeah, there are a couple of systems you can.
Interesting.
But they're not as widely available. But there are companies that make these systems. Maybe not as sophisticated as I mentioned. But there are
basic placeholders for.
Yeah, there are crude systems which have a nutrient tank, 3 levels, and then light. And then they stay inside a kitchen, and they don't have any humidity control, temperature control, CO2 control. So there are systems.
Right.
Yeah.
So final question before I end up this podcast.
Yeah.
Suppose we worked on this technology, made this a reality. So it may not be successful commercially because affordability is the case. But I'm pretty sure studying this technology, working on this technology can bring about spin-offs that can help agriculture industry as a whole. So where do you think if you perfect this technology, what spin-offs can you expect? What, that can massively boost agriculture or something?
I mean, to optimize a system like this in an ideal scenario, you have to, every bit is necessary. So what kind of sensors do you use? How efficient are they? How cost effective are they? How small are they? What plants are you using? What the genetics is of the plants? What are they bred for? What is their, how compatible are they with the system? How light use efficient are they? What are the lights you're using? How efficient are they? What is the spectrum that you're using? So I think each bit, all of this is fed from bits of research, right? So applying that research in all of this mass of research in one place is sort of synthesizing all of that into one system. That's sort of the immediate outcome I can think of. And then every little, advance in the pH probe efficiency, and then the software that's developed, the algorithms that's, powering the system.
Irrigation system
that can have, as you mentioned, irrigation system. The company, let's say, could use the same algorithm for something else. Right. So, there are applications.
So what do you think of this has been a long question, and think of a coffee plant or areca plant, tree, very water intensive plants. So what if there is a system of irrigation, like irrigation system where there's no water wastage, presently we use sprinkler system in coffee as well as areca. So what if there is a system where it directly feeds, the water feeds into the roots, not nearby soil, or can we imagine a system where plant roots are integrated, which is living system, the plant root is integrated to the non-living, so with efficient transport of water without wastage to the immediate environment.
You could do something like that, but I'm thinking of how.
Is it even possible, integrating living system with non-living?
I mean, the plug that I mentioned is sort of that interface.
Oh,
right.
Interesting.
So you have the non-living system, which is the hydroponic tray, and then you have the plant, which is the living system, and then the organic plug is sort of the intermediary, which absorbs water and then retains it. But essentially, it acts as a soil. So soil is the intermediate system. I think the closest thing we have is drip irrigation,
right?
Or micro drips. Those are efficient.
Soil is the interface.
Maybe you can have some sort of feedback-driven irrigation where it's not constantly on. Maybe you have probes at specific locations in the field, in the farm, and maybe you have probes that measure the internal water status of the plants, or some sort of imaging. Let's say a drone flies out repeatedly every however many hours and measures the water status, and like, oh, now it's dry, now we see the symptoms, now switch it on. Right. Instead of every hour or every day, something like that.
So systems like this could bring about precision in agriculture.
Yeah,
like a precision
precision agriculture. Yeah.
Interesting.
So depending on the climate, the weather.
So farmer can expect the outcome for this input. I can expect this outcome.
Yeah.
Like probable outcome. Considering this environmental plate.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You want anything to add before we end this podcast?
Oh no, I enjoyed this brainstorming session.
This brainstorming, me too. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time and for your mental compute.
It's fun.
All right.
Pleasure.
Yes.